Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever wondered if the people closest to you truly see you for who you are, or just for what they think you represent? We build our lives around trust, around the belief that family means safety, that love means protection. But what happens when that trust is seen as a weakness, and that love is seen as an opportunity? This is a story about a woman who was underestimated, a son who was blinded by a glittering illusion, and a daughter-in-law who believed that greed was smarter than wisdom. It's a story about a trap, not one made of steel and springs, but one woven from character, perception, and the quiet strength of a person who everyone had stopped looking at. A trap that was laid not for revenge, but for the truth to find its own way into the light. And it begins, as so many stories of quiet desperation do, in a small house filled with memories, where a hidden treasure was seen not as a legacy of love, but as a shortcut to a life that had never been earned. Eleanor Vance was a woman carved from resilience. Her hands, though now softened by age, held the memory of 1,000 tasks, kneading dough in the pre-dawn quiet, mending her son's torn jeans, and holding the hand of her husband, Robert, as he took his final breath. Her home was a museum of a life well lived, not of monetary value, but of emotional richness. Every chipped teacup had a story, every faded photograph was a portal to a sunnier day. Her son, Mark, was her world. She had raised him to be kind, to be honest, and to work hard, and he had become all those things. He was a good man, an architect whose mind was sharp, but whose heart was, perhaps, too open. When he brought Chloe home, Eleanor saw the dazzling smile, the expensive clothes, and the way she held onto Mark's arm, as if he were a prize she had just won. Eleanor wanted to see what her son saw, a vibrant, loving partner, who would build a future with him. But a lifetime of watching people, of understanding the language spoken when no words are used, gave Eleanor a faint, unsettling feeling, a cold whisper of doubt she couldn't quite place. She silenced it, telling herself it was just a mother's anxiety, the natural fear of being replaced. She welcomed Chloe into her home and into her heart, choosing to believe in the goodness Mark saw. After Robert's passing, there was one thing of significant material value he had left her. It wasn't the house, which was humble, or the small savings account. It was a necklace. An antique piece, a delicate cascade of sapphires and diamonds set in platinum, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. Robert had given it to her on their 10th anniversary, his own hands trembling as he fastened it around her neck. "This is our history, Eleanor," he had whispered, "and our future. If you ever need it, it will take care of you. But its real value is in the love it represents." She kept it hidden in a small, velvet-lined box tucked away inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf, a classic copy of Pride and Prejudice. It was her secret security, a promise from her late husband that she would never be destitute. But more than that, it was a tangible piece of his love, a sacred object she would look at from time to time, not to appraise its worth, but to feel his presence. She never spoke of it. It was a private matter, a bond between her and her lost love. But a secret so precious has a way of making its presence known, even in silence. And in a house built on love, a new presence, one built on avarice, had just walked through the door. Chloe's initial charm was a carefully constructed performance. During her first few visits to Eleanor's home, she was the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law. She complimented the garden, praised Eleanor's baking, and listened with wide-eyed, feigned interest to stories about Mark's childhood. "Oh, Eleanor, you have to tell me everything. I want to know all the embarrassing details," she would say with a laugh that tinkled like ice in a glass. Mark would beam, his face alight with joy at the sight of the two most important women in his life getting along so well. He was a man drowning in the pressures of his career, working long hours to secure a promotion that would finally allow him and Chloe to buy the kind of home she so often described, the kind she saw in glossy magazines. He saw their harmony as a sanctuary, a sign that everything was falling into place. He missed the subtle flickers of impatience in Chloe's eyes when Eleanor's stories went on too long. He didn't notice the way Chloe's gaze would roam around the living room, not with nostalgia, but with a cool, appraising assessment. He was deaf to the slight condescension in her tone when she'd say things like, "Oh, this little clock is so quaint. It's amazing these old things still work," Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything. She saw the way Chloe would subtly wipe her fingers after touching an old photograph, the faint wrinkle of her nose at the scent of mothballs in the spare room closet. These were tiny things, easily dismissed, but they began to accumulate in Eleanor's mind like dust in the corners of an unvisited room. The first real crack in Chloe's facade appeared on a Sunday afternoon. Eleanor was looking for an old photo album to show Mark, pulling books from the shelf. For a fleeting second, her hand brushed against the hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice. She quickly moved on, but not before Chloe's eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto the book. There was nothing to see, but Chloe's curiosity was a living thing, a predator sensing a hidden vulnerability. Later that day, while Eleanor was in the kitchen, Chloe helped put the books back on the shelf. "Let me get that for you, Eleanor, you shouldn't be straining yourself," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Chloe handled the books. When she picked up the specific volume, her movements became just a little too deliberate. She weighed it in her hand, her brow furrowed for a fraction of a second. She had noticed its unusual weight. It was a moment that lasted no more than 3 seconds, but for Eleanor, it was a thunderclap. The vague unease she had been feeling began to coalesce into a specific, chilling fear. This wasn't just a clash of generations or personalities. This was something different. This was the cold, calculating curiosity of a hunter. Eleanor knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her secret was no longer safe. The hunt had begun, and she was the unsuspecting prey. From that day on, the nature of Chloe's questions shifted. They became less about the past and more about possessions. The pressure on Mark began to escalate, a slow, steady tightening of a vice. Chloe's conversations with him, once filled with dreams for their future, now became itemized lists of their deficiencies. "Mark, did you see the car the Hendersons just bought?" she'd ask, scrolling through her phone over dinner. "We work so much harder than them. We deserve nice things too." Her definition of nice things was a constantly moving target, always just beyond their financial reach. The apartment they lived in, which had once felt cozy and perfect, was now cramped and embarrassing. The promotion Mark was working towards was no longer a goal, but a desperate necessity. She framed her materialism as a form of ambition for them as a couple. "I just want us to have the life we are worth," she'd say, placing her hand on his, her eyes sincere. Mark, exhausted and stressed, absorbed her anxieties as his own. He started working later, his face etched with a permanent worry that hadn't been there before. He saw his mother less, and when he did, he was distracted, his phone buzzing incessantly with texts from Chloe about real estate listings they couldn't afford. Chloe's campaign soon turned towards Eleanor. It was subtle at first. "Your mother has so many beautiful, old things," she'd remarked to Mark. "You know, some of those antiques can be worth a fortune. Has she ever had them appraised?" The suggestion was planted like a seed in fertile ground. "She probably doesn't even realize what she's sitting on. We could help her. You know, manage it for her. It would give her some security for her old age." The implication was clear. Eleanor's assets could become their assets. One evening, Chloe took a more direct approach. She had found an old, forgotten document in a desk drawer at Eleanor's house. While looking for a pen, it was a 20-year-old insurance appraisal for the necklace. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the number listed was staggering. She presented it to Mark not as a discovery, but as a crisis. "Mark, I found this," she said, her voice a carefully modulated blend of shock and concern. "Do you see this value? And your mother is living here, all alone, with something this valuable in the house. It's not safe. What if someone broke in?" She could be hurt. Mark's face went pale. He had a vague memory of the necklace, but had never known its worth. Chloe's panic felt real, and it ignited his own fear for his mother's safety. "We have to do something," Chloe insisted. "She needs to put it in a bank vault. Or better yet, she should sell it. It's too much risk for her to manage. With that money, she could move into a wonderful, secure retirement community, and we wouldn't have to worry about her. And with what's left over, it could help us get that down payment, Mark. It would solve all our problems." The trap was being set, but it wasn't for Eleanor. It was for Mark. Chloe was using his love for his mother as a weapon, twisting his protective instincts into a tool for her own greed. Eleanor watched her son's growing anxiety with a heavy heart. She knew its source. The conversations became more pointed. "Mom, Chloe and I are worried about you," Mark would say, echoing his wife's talking points. "That necklace. It's not safe to keep it here," Eleanor would simply reply, "It was your father's gift, Mark." "It's safe," but her quiet confidence was interpreted as stubbornness, as an old woman's refusal to face reality. The battle for Mark's soul was raging, and Eleanor was losing. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day etched into Eleanor's memory with the sharp clarity of a fresh wound. She had returned home early from her weekly grocery shopping, the silence of the house a welcome comfort. As she put away her things, she heard a sound from the living room. It was Chloe's voice, low and conspiratorial. Eleanor froze, her hand hovering over a carton of milk. Chloe was supposed to be at a yoga class. She crept silently to the edge of the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Chloe was on the phone, her back to the kitchen. Her voice, usually so sweet and melodic when speaking to Mark or Eleanor, was now sharp, metallic, and dripping with contempt. "You wouldn't believe it, Trish," Chloe was saying, a smug laugh in her throat. "The old woman is sitting on a gold mine. A literal gold mine. One necklace. That's all it would take to get us out of that showbox apartment and into the house in Northgate." There was a pause as her friend spoke. Then Chloe continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Oh, he has no idea. Mark thinks we are just concerned for her safety. He's a good man, which means he's easy to lead. He'll get her to sell it eventually. But honestly, it's taking too long. If she won't give it up willingly. Well, there are other ways. Things have a way of getting lost, you know." The cruelty of the words struck Eleanor with physical force. It was as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. The old woman goldmine, easy to lead, every word was a confirmation of her deepest fears. The kindness had been a mask. The concern had been a lie. The love for her son was just a lever to be pulled for financial gain. All the small moments of doubt, the odd glances, the probing questions, they all clicked into place, forming a single, hideous picture of deceit. Pain washed over her first, a deep, sorrowful ache for her son, who was being so masterfully manipulated. She felt a profound sense of loss, not for the necklace, but for the family she had hoped to have. But then, something else rose through the pain. It was the resilience that had been forged in her over a lifetime of hardship. It was the quiet strength of a woman who had buried a husband, raised a son on her own, and faced the world with unwavering dignity. Her sadness began to cool, hardening into a cold, clear resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not let this woman destroy her son's integrity and break his heart. She backed away from the doorway as silently as she had approached, her movements sure and steady. She went into her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She was no longer just a mother-in-law. She was a guardian. Chloe thought she was playing a simple game of chess with a novice. She had no idea she was playing against a queen who knew the board better than she ever could. The plan began to form in Eleanor's mind, not as a scheme for revenge, but as a lesson in truth. A lesson that Chloe would have to teach herself. Eleanor knew she couldn't just tell Mark what she had heard. Chloe would deny it, twist it, and paint Eleanor as a confused, meddling old woman. She needed more than words. She needed undeniable proof. She needed Chloe to walk directly into a trap of her own making. The huntress was about to become the hunted, and she would never even see it coming. Eleanor's first stop was not the police, but a small, dusty jewelry shop on a side street downtown, run by a man named Mr. Chen, whom she and Robert had known for 40 years. He was a craftsman of the old school, a man whose integrity was as solid as the gold he worked with. She entered the shop, the small bell above the door announcing her arrival. Mr. Chen looked up from his loupe, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Eleanor. It has been too long," he said, wiping his hands on a leather apron. She unwrapped the velvet box and placed the necklace on the counter. The sapphires seemed to drink the light, glowing with an inner fire. Mr. Chen let out a low whistle. "Ah, Robert's gift. A masterpiece. It is as beautiful as the day he bought it." "I need your help, David," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I need you to make me a copy of this. A very, very good copy. Good enough to fool someone who is greedy, but not good enough to fool an expert like you." Mr. Chen's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep concern. He looked from the necklace to Eleanor's determined face. He was a man who understood more than what was said. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded. "It will take time. And the materials. To make it look right, it will not be cheap. I will pay whatever it costs," Eleanor replied. "The cost of truth is something I can afford." For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor lived with a quiet, purposeful energy. She visited Mr. Chen to check on his progress, marveling at his skill as he sourced cubic zirconia and colored glass that mimicked the fire and depth of her real stones, setting them in a silver alloy base that was plated to look like aged platinum. While the replica was being crafted, Eleanor made her second purchase. It was a small, unassuming device, often sold as a nanny cam, disguised as a USB phone charger. It was simple to use. It plugged into the wall and recorded video to a tiny, hidden memory card. She spent an afternoon practicing with it, learning how to position it, how to retrieve the files on her old laptop. On the day she brought the replica home, she held it in one hand and the real necklace in the other. To an untrained eye, they were nearly identical. But Eleanor could feel the difference. The replica was lighter, colder. It lacked the history, the soul, of the original. She carefully placed the real necklace back in its velvet box and took it to a safety deposit box at the bank, a place it should have been all along. Then, she returned home and placed the imitation into the hollowed-out book. The trap was now baited. The final piece was the camera. She chose a spot carefully, an outlet behind a small armchair that had a perfect, unobstructed view of the bookshelf. The lens was no bigger than a pinhole. From a normal distance, the plug looked like any other charger, forgotten by a guest. She felt a pang of sorrow as she set it all up. This was her home, a place of love and trust, and she was turning it into a stage for a painful drama. She was orchestrating a moment that would bring immense pain to her son, the person she loved most in the world. But the alternative, she knew, was worse. Allowing a lie to fester, allowing her son to build his life with a woman who saw him as a means to an end, was a far greater betrayal. She was not setting a trap for Chloe out of spite. She was building a mirror, and she was simply going to allow Chloe to stand in front of it so Mark could finally see her true reflection. The opportunity came sooner than Eleanor had anticipated. Chloe called her on a Friday morning, her voice a symphony of false concern. "Eleanor, I'm so glad I caught you. Mark and I were thinking, you haven't had a day to yourself in ages. We booked you a spa day. A full package, massage, facial, the works. It's our treat. You absolutely have to go." You deserve to be pampered. Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. It was happening. The feigned generosity was the cover. They wanted her out of the house for a guaranteed, extended period. "Oh, Chloe, that's so thoughtful," Eleanor said, playing her part. "But I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense. It's all paid for. The appointment is at noon. Don't be late." Chloe insisted, then hung up before Eleanor could protest further. Eleanor sat in the quiet of her kitchen, the phone still in her hand. She had no intention of going to the spa. Instead, she went to her neighbor, Martha's, house. She told her she wasn't feeling well, and asked if she could sit with her for the afternoon. At exactly 12:30 p.m., as Eleanor was sipping tea in Martha's cozy living room, a car pulled into her driveway. It was Chloe. Eleanor watched from the window as Chloe got out, looked around nervously, and then used the spare key Eleanor had given her for emergencies to let herself in. The show was about to begin. Inside the house, the tiny lens of the hidden camera began to record. Chloe entered the living room, her movements quick and furtive. There was no pretense now. Her face was a mask of greedy determination. She went straight to the bookshelf, her eyes scanning the titles. She pulled down Pride and Prejudice, her hands fumbling slightly in her haste. She opened the cover and her breath hitched as she saw the hollowed-out compartment. Inside, nestled on the faded velvet, lay the glittering replica. A triumphant, ugly smile spread across her face. She snatched the necklace, not even giving it a second glance, and shoved it into her handbag. Her mission was not yet complete. To cover her tracks, she began to create a scene of chaos. She pulled a few other books from the shelf and threw them on the floor. She knocked over a vase of flowers, sending water and petals spilling across the polished wood. She opened a few drawers, mussing the contents to make it look like a frantic search. The performance was clumsy, amateurish. It was the work of someone who had seen break-ins in movies, but had no concept of the real thing. It was an act of profound arrogance. She believed she was smarter than everyone, especially the old woman she was robbing. After a few minutes of stage destruction, she stood back to admire her work. Satisfied, she walked out of the house, got in her car, and sped away. In her mind, she was already spending the money, furnishing the house in Northgate, living the life she felt she was owed. She was so blinded by the sparkle of her prize that she never considered the possibility that the sparkle itself could be a lie. The little camera in the wall plug continued to record the silent, empty room, its memory card now holding the irrefutable, damning truth. Chloe didn't even bother to go home first. The thrill of her success, the feeling of the cool, heavy jewels in her handbag, was too intoxicating. Adrenaline coursed through her veins. She drove directly to the city's most upscale and discreet pawn shop, a place known for dealing in high-end jewelry and paying top dollar in cash, no questions asked. The sign on the door was understated, Harrison Fine Goods. She pushed open the heavy glass door, a confident smirk on her lips. She felt powerful, clever. She had orchestrated the perfect crime. The interior was quiet and richly decorated, smelling of leather and old money. A man in a tailored suit with slicked-back grey hair stood behind a marble counter. This was Mr. Harrison, a man who had seen every type of desperation and greed walk through his door. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth and neutral. "How can I help you?" Chloe placed her handbag on the counter and pulled out the necklace, letting it spill onto the black velvet tray he had ready. "I'd like to sell this," she said, her voice steady. "It's a family piece, but times are tough," the lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. Mr. Harrison picked up the necklace. His expression didn't change, but his experienced hands immediately registered the weight. It was too light. He picked up his jeweller's loop, holding the main pendant under the bright counter light. Chloe watched him, her heart beginning to pound. She expected him to gasp, to marvel at its quality. Instead, a long silence stretched between them. Mr. Harrison put down the loop, his face an unreadable mask. He gently prodded one of the sapphires with a small metal tool. Then he looked up at her, a flicker of something between pity and contempt in his eyes. He began, his voice losing its earlier smoothness. Where did you get this? I told you, it's a family heirloom, Chloe snapped, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Mr. Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound that cut through Chloe's confidence like a shard of glass. He pushed the necklace back across the counter towards her. This is not an heirloom, he said, his voice flat and dismissive. This is, at best, a very ambitious piece of costume jewelry. The stones are glass, the diamonds are zirconia, and the setting is silver plate. It's worth maybe $200. For the craftsmanship, the words hit Chloe with the force of a physical blow. Her face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned a splotchy, pale white. What? No. That's impossible. It's been appraised. It's worth a fortune, she stammered, her voice rising in panic and disbelief. Then I suggest you take it back to whoever appraised it, Mr. Harrison said, his tone icy. He had already turned his attention to polishing the countertop, dismissing her completely. Now if you'll excuse me, I have real clients to attend to. Humiliation washed over Chloe in a hot, sickening wave. She stared at the necklace, the glittering lie on the velvet tray. It suddenly looked cheap, garish. All her planning, her deceit, her feeling of superiority, it all crumbled into dust in the cold, judgmental light of the pawn shop. She snatched the fake necklace, her hands shaking with rage, and shoved it back into her bag. She stumbled out of the shop, her face burning, her mind reeling. She hadn't been clever. She had been a fool. Someone had played her. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated fury, she knew exactly who it was. The old woman. Somehow, the quiet, frail old woman had outsmarted her. Her humiliation quickly curdled into a venomous rage. She wasn't just going to confront Eleanor. She was going to destroy her. While Chloe was facing her public humiliation, Eleanor was setting the final act in motion. She returned home from her neighbor's house in the late afternoon. She walked into her living room and surveyed the scene Chloe had created. The overturned vase, the scattered books. It was a pathetic, almost laughable attempt at deception. She calmly righted the books, mopped up the water, and put the flowers back in the vase. She didn't need the mess. The real evidence was far more potent. She retrieved the small USB charger from the wall socket, her hands perfectly steady. She sat down at her old dining room table, plugged the device into her laptop, and opened the video file. She watched the footage, her expression a mixture of profound sadness and grim validation. There was Chloe, her face twisted with greed, snatching the necklace. There she was, callously throwing treasured possessions on the floor. It was ugly, it was damning, and it was exactly what she needed. She picked up the phone and called her son. Mark, she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made him stop what he was doing. I need you to come over. Something has happened at the house. What is it? Are you okay? He asked, panic in his voice. I'm fine, dear. Just please come. There's something I need to show you. When Mark arrived 20 minutes later, his face was a canvas of worry. He saw the tidy living room and was confused. Mom, what's wrong? You said something happened. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She simply gestured for him to sit down at the table next to her. She turned the laptop screen towards him. I didn't want to tell you this, Mark, she said softly. I wanted to let you see it for yourself. I think it's the only way you'll understand. She pressed play. Mark leaned in, his brow furrowed. The video started, showing the empty living room. Then, the front door opened, and Chloe walked in. Mark's face registered confusion. Chloe? What is she doing there? I thought you were at the spa. He kept watching, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He saw his wife's furtive movements, her rush to the bookshelf. He saw her pull out the fake book, a triumphant smile on her face as she grabbed the necklace. He watched, his breathing becoming shallow, as she ransacked the room, her actions cold and deliberate. The world Mark had built, the reality he had believed in, shattered into a million pieces. The sound on the video was faint, but the images were brutally clear. This was not a concerned wife. This was a thief. This was a stranger wearing his wife's face. When the video ended, he just sat there, staring at the blank screen, his face ashen. The woman he loved, the woman he had defended, the woman he had planned his entire future with, had just betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable. He looked at his mother, and for the first time in months, he truly saw her. He saw the pain in her eyes, not of triumph, but of deep, heartbreaking sorrow for him. At that exact moment, the front door burst open. It was Chloe, her face a thunderous mask of rage. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. "You set me up. You switched it. That necklace is a fake." She was so blinded by her fury that she didn't even see Mark sitting at the table. Mark stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the wood floor. The sound made Chloe freeze. Her eyes darted from Eleanor to Mark, and the color drained from her face. The fury was instantly replaced by panic. "Mark. I can explain," she stammered. "Your mother." "She explain what, Chloe?" Mark's voice was dangerously quiet, hollowed out by betrayal. "Explain how you came into my mother's house while she was gone. Explain how you stole from her. Or should we start with how you staged a break-in?" "It's all right here," he gestured to the laptop. "My mother didn't set you up. You walked into a trap of your own character. You were so sure she was a fool, you never imagined she could be wise." The silence in the room was thick with the wreckage of their marriage. Chloe stared at the laptop, then back at Mark's cold, devastated face. The lies, the manipulations, the web of deceit she had so carefully woven, had all come undone. There was nowhere left to hide. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like. I was worried about the necklace. I was going to take it to get it secured, to put it in a vault for her." The lie was desperate, pathetic, and it hung in the air between them like a toxic fog. Mark let out a humorless laugh. "A vault? Is that what they call pawn shops now? You weren't protecting her, Chloe. You were using her. You were using me." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "All this time, the pressure about money, the new house, the car. It wasn't for us. It was for you. You looked at my mother, a woman who raised me, who has loved me unconditionally my entire life, and you saw nothing but an obstacle with a price tag. You saw her love as a weakness to be exploited. You saw my love as a tool to get what you want." Each word was a judgment, a final verdict on her character. Eleanor watched, her heart aching for her son's pain, but knowing this agonizing moment was necessary. It was the surgery required to remove a sickness. "She is worth more than every materialistic dream you have ever had," Mark continued, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and grief. "Her integrity, her quiet strength. That is true wealth. Something you know nothing about." Chloe finally broke. The mask of sophistication shattered, revealing the ugly, grasping desperation beneath. "Fine," she spat, venom in her voice. "You're right. Are you happy? I wanted a better life. A life you were too slow to give me. And she was just sitting on it, that old woman, hoarding it away. What does she need it for? Her life is over. Ours was just beginning." The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. That was the final, unforgivable confession. In that moment, Mark saw her completely, without illusion, and the love he had felt for her died. "Get out," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Get your things from the apartment and get out of my life, Mark," she began, reaching for him. "Now," he commanded, his voice like steel. Chloe flinched as if struck. She gave Eleanor one last look of pure hatred, then turned and fled, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet. Mark sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The sobs that racked his body were the sound of a heart breaking, of a future dissolving. Eleanor came and stood behind him, placing a gentle hand on his shaking shoulder. She didn't say, "I told you so," she didn't say anything at all. She just stood with him in his pain, a silent, unwavering pillar of the love he had almost thrown away. He had been so busy chasing a glittering fake that he had nearly lost sight of the real, priceless treasure that had been with him all along. In the weeks that followed, a quiet healing began. The house, which had been a stage for deceit, once again became a sanctuary. Mark spent his evenings there, not out of obligation, but out of a deep need to reconnect with something real. He and Eleanor talked for hours, not about Chloe or the betrayal, but about everything else. They talked about his father, about his childhood dreams, about the kind of man he still wanted to be. He helped her in the garden, his hands in the soil, feeling the grounding presence of the earth. He was rediscovering the simple, profound truths he had forgotten, that happiness isn't bought, it's built, that respect isn't a transaction, it's a foundation, and that a family's strength isn't measured by its assets, but by its love. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Mark finally looked at his mother and said the words that had been sitting in his heart. "I am so sorry, Mom. I was blind. I let her turn me against my own values. I let her make me doubt you. You were strong and wise, and I treated you like you were fragile and foolish. Can you ever forgive me?" Eleanor reached across and took his hand. Her smile was gentle, filled with an endless capacity for grace. "Oh, Mark," she said softly. "There is nothing to forgive. A son's love is a powerful thing. You wanted to believe in the best in her. Your only fault was having a good heart. But you've learned a painful lesson. You must never let the sparkle of something new blind you to the value of something timeless." She squeezed his hand. "The real treasure was never the necklace. It was you. And you're right here." A year later, the house was filled with laughter again. Mark had found his footing, not just professionally, but personally. He was calmer, more centered, more like the man his father had been. He hadn't just divorced Chloe, he had divorced the life of hollow ambition she represented. The real necklace remained in the bank vault, untouched. Its monetary value was irrelevant. Its true purpose had been fulfilled. It had acted as a catalyst, a silent judge of character that revealed the truth, and in doing so, had saved her son. It had protected her family's future, just as Robert had known it would. And so we come to the end of our story. What does it teach us? It teaches us that we should never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones we might dismiss as old-fashioned or out of touch. Wisdom is not loud, it is observant. Strength is not aggressive, it is resilient. It reminds us that character is the one currency that cannot be faked, and greed is a trap that always, eventually, snaps shut on the one who sets it. The most valuable things in our lives are rarely the ones that glitter. They are the people who love us unconditionally, who stand by us in the storm, and who have the wisdom to see the truth when we are blinded by the light. So I ask you, look around at your own life. Who is the Eleanor in your world? Who is the quiet, steady presence whose wisdom you might be taking for granted? Remind them that you see them. Remind them that you value them. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that true worth is not what you own, but who you are. Thank you for listening.